Hey, welcome to The Hard Problem. This is a podcast that I record with the faculty of the Multiverse School, who include a number of computer and cognitive scientists, and also sometimes the students of the Multiverse School or the researchers of the Multiverse School, who tend to be like high level machine learning folks and academics. So we've been reading this A Landscape of Consciousness paper, and it's really interesting. It covers 212 consciousness theories, and so we're going to talk about it. We're going to dig into it. We're going to talk about the new AI news and things like that. We're trying to relate consciousness, AI, and all those other topics that all of us tend to be interested in here. So, yeah, with that, let's get started. Welcome to The Hard Problem. Thanks for joining us. We're going to talk about so many cool things today. All right, well, so let's talk a little bit about what are we even doing here? Why are we doing this real quick? What is it that we're trying to figure out? There's this thing called The Hard Problem. Who wants to give me an intro of it?
You know, the hard problem is that it's really hard to figure out how to physically define. I say physically, but generally, scientifically access and define what is qualia, the subjective experience, and how do you capture that? How do you recognize it in other things? It's still kind of a hard problem. I'm not really digging into the roots of it though. Um,
Yeah,
what's
I would say,
yeah.
it's a term invented by Chalmers, and it
Mhm.
is really around the problem that we have of explaining qualia, this experience, the subjective experience we have as an individual consciousness and our experience of the world, and how that is explained through that's how the brain and the universe works. And the hard problem is we just don't have enough the resolution to see how our physical processes give rise to consciousness. And, this paper, I think, goes over a lot of different approaches from different, kind of fields, from like philosophy to mathematics to, network theory. But, for me, and kind of one of the hard problem with the hard problem for me is I don't know if there is something ineffable or separate as much as it is just something that we don't understand completely yet. And so I'm in the camp of the science just isn't there yet, and it's just computation all the way down, but it's
Ma-
not known. And I
Magic
think
is
that's
just
kind of
something we don't fully understand yet.
100%.
Like,
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's difficult to really put a pin in it. Sometimes I am of one mind, others, another one. It kind of depends on, my mood that day. Just because I
yeah.
haven't seen anything that's really compelled me to commit. Okay, some philosophical commitments, but not as many as I think. It does. I'm not solidly in any camp, but I think we're most likely to find materialism. We're most
Yeah.
likely to be able to somehow explain it phenomenologically, right? But like, not now. Right now, we don't have the computational power, right?
We're
That's what I
trying
think.
slowly. There's some wild ideas about how we can bind the ineffable to the effable. So,
Right? Like, get concrete on it. So, we've been wanting to go over a lot of the different theories and actually just explain them. So
yep.
there's Penrose's theory. Anyone want to like bring it?
Well, are we
Start
are we
us
going
off?
to go into a segment? Because I have a segment prepared for that.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's
Cool.
kick off the Penrose segment.
Yeah. This one's I'm calling it microtubules and consciousness because I know white men. So first is just like I'll drop the quite your quick grok on what is a micro. If you don't know, it's cool. Yeah. Well, so you're dead on. So Penrose comes in with this theory that it's not the neural level so much that defines consciousness. He's saying you go a layer deeper into these little structures that are vibrating little hollow tubes inside of your cells. And we can get into why that is, but the whole point is this: we're trying to drill a little deeper than just the explanation of neural patterns equals consciousness. I'm not sure I'm fully convinced, but there's some interesting stuff along the ride. So a microtubule is, and let me think for a second. We don't need any visuals, right? Let's just stick to.
You can think of it almost like a carbon nanotube, right? It's
yes.
tubular scaffolding structure made of
Mhm.
protein, and it's used for both
Made of
like
tubulin.
structural components within the cell, and it's also
Mhm.
used during cell division and
Mhm.
for motility. And so
Mhm.
it's how
So that's the
kind of
key, is
routine
that
problem.
these things are working throughout cell processes, right? So there are these little hollow tubes. They're made of polymerized tubulin proteins, and they're part of your like cellular cytoskeleton, so like the structural stuff, but they're really involved in kind of everything. They have these weird properties. They can dynamically resize themselves. They they transport organelles and other substances within the cell. Transport's a pretty big function at our scale, at the meso-human scale, right? It helps with mitosis, right? So it provides the spindle that splits the DNA, and it also is involved in like the cilia and the flagella, the things that move. What we've just described is like every part of a damn cell, and kind of the cell's whole life. It's like the reproduction, it's the internal communication and resource management, and its external movement. That's a pretty robust system if you think about inputs, outputs, and complex internal states.
Yeah.
Thoughts so far on these little dudes?
Yeah. I mean, well, I also I read about the guy who originally talked to Penrose about this
Hey,
theory.
Hoff, whatever. What's the name?
I don't think
Hoffman?
we've actually named the theory, right? All we've talked about is the
I'm walking towards it.
Okay.
I'm not going to
Yeah.
define stuff at the top. We got to walk in. So,
Yeah.
so
He was like an
Okay.
anesthesiologist, I think it was,
is that
right?
right? I'm looking for the name. Hammeroff?
Hammeroff. Yeah, that's the
Hammeroff.
one.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hammeroff got really excited about this idea in the 80s. It's like, oh, these things might be little molecular computers. Look at these little weirdos floating around in there doing stuff. What I'm getting out of this is just from this baseline of understanding kind of what is one of these things, these microtubules that are underpinning the rest of this discussion, is that they're pretty general purpose. They do a lot of the stuff that we care about at higher tiers. Like they're doing similar things to blood vessels. They're doing similar things to your lymphatic system. They're doing similar things to neural communication. And
Like
to
a
me,
relevant interface.
sure, yeah. Wait, when you say interface, expand on that.
Their boundary, like one of the big things is okay, there's some quantum weirdness with them, but so
Yeah.
what? Why is that important?
Sure. This is where the complaints start to come. But
Well,
yeah.
I also like microtube. It's like saying the the endoplasmic reticulum or like the cell wall, right? Like there's no computation really happening in these microtubules per se. It's more of like the
Mhm.
rails and everything runs. And so that would be, I would
Well,
kind of
that-
point to, okay, well, where is the input, right? Where are we somehow doing a computation or reducing entropy or something
Yeah.
that is changing the state? But I don't
So-
know.
Right. And I think that's legitimately right, the entry point for the arguments, right? It's like, hey, whoa, what, how is this doing this? And I think it gets into some stuff, and cover that in a bit, but like it does start to touch on this idea. It's not really just the tubule itself. It's more like the way they're able to do, like the things I mentioned, like they can dynamically resize. Apparently that's like super critical to the way it can influence overall cell behavior. And so it is still focused, like this whole theory is still focused on microtubules within neurons. Like what are they doing for neurons? So it's not saying microtubules are just like the stuff, but it's more like saying without these, I don't think the rest of it would work. And let's keep going. Let me
Yeah,
think.
so
Go on.
I read that there was some recent research in this,
Ooh.
right?
I may have missed.
So
Please share.
my understanding of the Hammeroff part of the Penrose principle is basically he said there's these ions that are traveling through back and forth through these microtubules. And we found that under general anesthesia, when people lose consciousness, they stop moving. They
Oh.
are frozen in place. They're no longer being carried back and so he was like, that's something. Like that is something
Sure.
measurable in the brain
Sure.
that occurs during consciousness, but not during general anesthesia consciousness. Loss
Okay.
of consciousness,
So now I'm
right?
seeing why he's, the surgeon got interested.
Right. So light's doing its thing, it's waving around until it runs into things, and then it becomes a particle for a second. Turns out, similar to like how fiber optic cables work to like carry light further, even through bends and stuff, you can kind of amplify the amount of light energy that's going out by like bouncing it around, essentially. It's kind of the thing.
Okay. Sure.
Like fermions and like vortexes have to happen, but like it's a nonlinear optical pattern or a nonlinear light.
You're talking about
Like
inside of a fiber optic
estimation.
cable kind of, yeah.
Right. And so then they found that L-tryptophan is somehow related to the
Yeah, that's what I was-
microtubules and their ability to produce super radiance. And so like this is where, like there's a lot of other consciousness theories that get very into like not just quantum stuff, but like
Mhm.
the what's it called? The pineal gland and like dreams and stuff
Sure.
like that. And
Sure,
like,
sure.
like all that area of stuff. So that, I mean, a lot of that stuff is mediated by L-tryptophan, right? Like that's how it's like triggered that you release DMT so you can dream and stuff like that, right? So there's these connecting parts and there's these mechanisms that have been like proposed as clearly these interact. We
Right.
can see and somehow
Undeniable.
intuit that these interactions are significant and that they relate to consciousness because when people are unconscious, this process stops happening. But when they're
But
conscious,
that's also a pretty specific definition of conscious, right? That it
right.
doesn't satisfy a lot of the real like hard theories here. We're not talking about how awake I am. We're talking about
Right.
how
Yeah, exactly.
how active my brain
Very
is.
from a medical
Yeah,
perspective and not from a like philosophical perspective. And that's like,
but
it's
that's the
fine.
start. Yeah, that's
It's
the
an
entry.
important part. Like,
Right. Yeah, I haven't read into the tryptophan stuff, so that's wild.
it's like really
It's
recent. I think like last month or something like that.
yeah, yeah. So this is
So-
we're into the theory now, but go on.
It seems like, the microtubules are somehow, it's almost like, so the way that human consciousness is very different from like an LLM is that LLM just has a single forward pass, right? But for us is
I know delete key.
through our experience, we are constantly updating our network, right? And we're constantly having weight updates. And so it almost feels like microtubules is a way in which we store those weights and those updates.
That could be that
And
tracks
when
suddenly. I hadn't thought
under
of that.
general anesthesia, when those aren't moving, it explains why we don't lose memories, but we don't form any new ones,
Right.
because we've essentially made the hard drive
frozen the
resolve.
learning.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we've frozen the network from learning.
Interesting.
And so
I had never
the-
connected this.
Which is the experience of learning of that is consciousness.
Yeah.
That we
Yeah, the
that
experience.
you have to run the step function
consciousness
for.
is the experience of learning. Yeah. I'm just quoting you.
And
Well,
like-
I mean, it's also it's function error, right? For like
Sure.
the next step.
Yeah.
But like,
Because
it
learning
seems
just
to be
means
like-
adapting something
Yeah.
differently, right?
But
Yeah.
if we can disrupt how the microtubules and the ion flows change, it seems to kind of freeze everything in place.
So yeah, and these are, I'm loving this. Like I feel like these are interesting connections that are falsifiable questions one could ask in the scientific place. It
Yeah,
does
exactly.
reach a little further beyond into this space, fully about quantum superpositions of all the possible states of all the tubules involved in a thought. And that's where it gets into this idea of like, if it's about the tubules can capture some sort of superposition of quantum states. And it gets into this idea of state reductions, which I think, now correct me if I'm wrong, I think that relates to like double slit type experiments, quantum stuff,
So
right?
can I?
Like,
speak on? Well, I mean,
Yeah,
not an
please.
expert. I
Yeah,
main reference is that one SMBC comic. So take that with again my statistics background. Do is you try to accept your solution cancel out tubers to the electromagnetic field theory. But I wonder if because the main issue with quantum computing, like in general, right, and perhaps the biggest drawback of this theory as applies to humans, is that you need isolation, because otherwise you just have the noise, just like it doesn't. You're not guaranteed that the noise will like destructively cancel out, right? And so you're not going to get any results. But if you say that there's a fundamental way, I don't know, you have to bring the isolation in somehow for the collapse to give you the result.
So do you think then that can apply to the tubules? Like they have isolation? They have local isolation?
This is the whole objection that most people are lodging is like, it's very warm, very wet in there. I don't know if you know, but it's pretty hard to make quantum computation happen in a warm and wet environment.
How about out there theory? I'm going to say it once and then we can move on. If you posit that there's like fundamental, I don't know, like waves, I guess you can have the electromagnetic field theories, like there are electromagnetic fields associated with different things, and those reflect in our thinking and in our kind of brain cycles, right? And I wonder if you have like a constant wave, for lack of a better word, if that produces isolation in regards to that wave. Like I don't remember if you remember the CQ or anything, but like there's this whole idea that like when you're solving for things, you need to find the zeros, right? Because you can, if you, like if there, I wonder, and this is me making it up, like if you have a strong constant that like regard to that, even if it's like, because all of these things are relative in the sense that you're really looking at the differences between things, right? You're not really looking at the thing. There's no like quantum. You like physics. You're not really looking at the thing by itself. You're looking at a thing in relation to other things. And so, if the other thing is like definite enough, maybe that produces enough of a stability to produce isolation through some indirect mechanism. But as you can see, that's several steps far removed, and this is why the microtubule theory, I think, is not taken seriously.
Sure.
Right. Yeah, this is the main objection. Is it's very difficult to do the isolation required. But this was what the recent research was, is like mega networks of tryptophan and biological architectures are isolated by the microtubules themselves, basically. And so there's isolation produced from very large protein, collective UV superradiance from very large protein architectures of quantum emitters is enhanced with increasing system size, resulting in observable and robust increases in the thermal quantum yield, right?
You got to break that down.
Yeah. So large
remember
proteins.
Remember the empty chair. There's people listening.
Yeah,
We got to help them.
So super radiance, which is like, it's like, let's see, super radiant states are like stable quantum emitters, right? It's like an isolated system, right? It means that you're not going to have loss of information within a waveform that is carried across a super radiant Hilbert space, a super radiant space, right? Which is, or not like a super radiant, but like a, that's what it described. You're not going to lose information, basically. That's kind of the definition. And so that's like that's what Penrose is on about, is largely like, he's the guy who invented non-tiling or non-repeating tiles and stuff like that, right? So he's like very into the topology, how do shapes fit together. And so how do we get to a structure that is a stable quantum, like, unit of stability, right? And so a quantum emitter, let's see, it's basically, it allows you to have a signal that is processed somehow through some quantum process. It's meant to be arbitrary. It's like a function, it's like we put a function there. And so that's what we're talking about, is that like you can use a lot of proteins
to make a stable quantum emitter, and that actually gets more stable as there are additional structures added. It's complicated.
I mean,
I
sure.
don't, I'm not like,
But
oh,
is this,
I'm just like,
at this point, are we just describing the way all matter interacts? Like, wait, how does this, where does this scale
no,
up to something meaningful for consciousness? Like,
it's specifically like a microtubule has in it basically inner stability so that you can have a really long microtubule with a quantum waveform of probability in the center of it that doesn't collapse for a very long way, basically.
okay. So
Like a
long
good
distance transmission of potentially things like information or
right,
vacuoles or whatever the hell is moving around.
right.
So that was,
Of waveforms or packets of information,
yeah.
however we want to
Information
get
being the
down.
critical one, though. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, information. And that's
'Cause
like the
I
thing is
stand in
there's
the
some
space where consciousness must have an informational component. It's an informational entity in some capacity. And I think that that's where the tubules do line up. You know, if before all we were focused on was neurons, that neurons make up minds. Well, neurons are made up of these, and they're doing
right.
some sort of like similar structural informational processing of, but you know, we get into the bees now, all the buzzing stuff that I'm not as versed in, and we're all
From the literature, it seems like
different
it's focused mostly on like free radicals, right?
Mhm.
And microtubules. And so like they like gave rats some stuff that like attached to microtubules, and then the anesthetic didn't work as well. And then they gave them a drug which suppressed the natural free radical elimination process. And so basically pumped up the concentration, and then that was basically able to counteract the effect. Which is pretty interesting.
Yeah. What do you draw from that for the discussion? I'm blanking on the outcome.
I think I'm still trying to understand like where the quantum effects come in, and specifically around the fact that xenon gas anesthesia works, where it's a noble gas,
Yeah.
and it's for some reason it's like a nuclear spin is affecting like the locality of the field, and it therefore like changes how it propagates through the microtubule. Like, is that a quantum effect? Like, I guess everything I'm trying to be more specific that there are quantum effects, and then there's quantum computing, right?
Yes.
And so we can say, hey, there's quantum effects that's happening here,
right?
But are we essentially saying, oh, these microtubules are acting like a qubit or something like it? And
right.
You know,
that feels like it's too far afield, right? Like
superposition.
It doesn't track very well from me.
And you don't have the evidence for it or the energies that would be required to, smash things together to figure that out. But
I feel like every theory is arrayed at a specific problem in the consciousness space. And I feel like this theory is pointed directly at there was a study where when you reach over for a glass of water, like at what point does that thought originate? And a lot of times your hand will begin reaching before before the thought is formed, right?
The motor neurons fire
these
before you're consciously
premeditation
aware.
Things, yeah. There's discussion about how a lot of fear comes after running from a threat.
Right.
You know, these kinds of interesting, like almost like an eventual consistency pattern in dev world. Like,
right, exactly.
Like
These
your whole
agents
system
are
is
totally
like,
not
there's a bear,
directly.
and then you run, and then these slower processes are like,
oh, I'm running because of a bear. Got it.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Where are we running?
It's like, I think it's arrayed at that point where it's like, okay, well, if the impulse to drink water doesn't come from the words that appear in my music come from, well, maybe it's outside of, and it's in a quantum place, or maybe the actual computation is happening in the body and not in like just this part. And this is just like the language model or something,
Right. Here we are. Right back to language models.
So, I mean, that's my understanding of what that specific theory attempts to address. And I don't know that it fully covers it, but it covers some mechanisms for sure.
It also, back to the double split idea, and it's not a perfect metaphor for it, but it's interesting because they sort of propose here that the collapsing of the waveform happens at a time scale that is neurologically relevant. So essentially, the collapsing of the waveform is a moment of consciousness that is produced. And I don't know if I like that. I'm genuinely not saying that to say yes or no. I'm saying I have no idea if I like that. But it at least captures the idea in a way that is sort of tangible of where exactly are you targeting with this discussion, and it's saying like, well, neurons are still like clearly involved, but there is a moment to be captured. There is a moment to moment that, and that kind of ties it into the quality of thing. It's interesting. Yeah. I think we need to get on though. And this is most of what I had. I mean, we've covered up and down a lot of the stuff, but I do want to kind of give a sort of a quickie rundown of what where does this land for the the robot segment, right? When we talk about models, when we talk about evolving AI, and this sort of hit me in two different ways. That's really interesting. In one way, it's almost doubling down on biological essentialism and saying, hey, if you don't have these tubules, you're shit out of luck, kid. I don't think that's the complete view, because the other half of it is the complete opposite, which is, hey, actually, you don't need neurons. You just need something that can be in touch with like the quantum states, and more of a panpsychist thing, right? Is panpsychist? That's the one, right?
It's panpsychist.
There's a little bit of mind in everything, and I think that's compelling. It leaves me feeling kind of like better about being a entity that will one day disassemble.
It makes me feel better for when I call out for my keys when I can't find them. So I like it.
Maybe they'll be reaching back.
Yeah.
Thoughts though in that space, given what we've been managed to communicate about this theory, like where's the hitch for the?
Yeah, I think that is, it really does get to the epistemology of consciousness. Like, do we think that consciousness is something that is somehow sacred and therefore non-mechanical, and therefore no mechanical process can ever be said to be conscious? Or do we think it not, can we have consciousness arise in previously unconscious systems, right?
I would push back against the use of mechanical, because I think that has a very particular connotation. I would say material in this case.
Yeah.
Because we aren't talking about like a clockwork universe. Like, we know that it's non-deterministic. Like, we have quantum effects.
Right. Yeah, exactly. But it's like, is it material? Is it phenomenological? Or is it, a mystery field that permeates all things? Yeah.
Well, I think this transitions into our next topic if we're ready to move on.
Well, let's do it.
Yeah, go for it. Again.
So I think this ties in directly to an article that I read this week that was published by Stephen Wolfram. It's called The Computational View of Time. It's a pretty long article, but the gist of it is that he argues that our subjective experience is a form of computation, and essentially consciousness is just computation. And she focuses a lot on his theory of computational irreducibility, which basically means that complex emergent systems can come out of fairly simple rules. And the only way to compute these super chaotic systems is to actually just simulate the entire state from start to finish.
Computational modeling.
And therefore, the only way for us to experience consciousness is through stepwise. And essentially, our experience of time is a reflection of our limited computational capacity, in that the universe is actually time invariant.
Right.
And our subjective experience is just our computation running, essentially.
Sliding.
Yeah, which is interesting. I think kind of ties back to the microtubules and the things that you're about before.
Moments of consciousness in time. Yeah.
Well, yeah, if we're saying that, like, okay, if the brain and consciousness is computation, we're saying microtubules are part of that, and it's kind of like how we are, quote unquote, like writing to the hard disk, or updating the weights of the network. But does that necessarily need a quantum effect, right? Like, does this be a quantum computer, I guess? And so I guess that's where it's next for me is, do we think of the human brain as a computer? And, I think this even goes back to like what Sam Altman was saying.
Yeah,
It makes a lot of sense. Go on.
well, I read his other thing, the like theory of everything blog
Mhm.
post that he put out during the pandemic, and then I kind of dug into some of the papers.
Or the physics project.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it has some interesting thoughts, and I like that theory as well because I'm a computer scientist and it makes sense to me. Like that's just the thing is it's like, well, let's put the universe in terms that you naturally think in all the time. So like that's part of why I like it. But also, I mean, I've played with some of their like computational life work,
Yeah.
and also there's like this thing called
Everything's-
Lumia, which was like a really it's like a game of life, but based more on fields than on cellular automata. And it really showcases organisms flowing across rather than like moving and being a discrete unit. And I feel like a lot of stuff like consciousness is that. It's like the feeling of propagating fluidly across a series of instances, events, or steps. So yeah, it makes perfect sense to me, but it's my language.
Right. Right. Well, and that reaches into mine with not only the computer minded approach, but also my science. Like there are phenomena that you cannot capture closed form. You have to. It's like the chaos stuff, right? That's how weather works. That's how weather prediction. It's not from some like almanac that we solved all weather. We simulate everything, and if something as complex as like 1 quadrillion water particles moving through space, you're like, yeah, it makes sense that we need to adopt a sort of like human scale perspective, right? But it kind of tracks to the idea that, yeah, we are extended in space and we are extended in time, and like our ability to see in that time spectrum is limited. We can like think back a little, and we can think forward a bit, but other than that, we're just kind of sliding into our Amigara fault holes. Sorry, it's October. We got to talk about horror. So,
yeah, to get philosophical, right there, going back to Alan Watts, he would say like there is no future or past, right? There is only the present experience. And any experience of the past is just us reimagining a memory, right? And like the act of remembering a memory alters it, irreversibly.
Yes.
And like
remember,
sure, it's just like our future prediction and like anxiety and
legit.
Like all we can really say that is that for certain for anyone is that like I exist in this present moment.
Yeah. I mean, hey, Descartes, I'll talk about him sometime. Yeah. And the notion of remembering and the notion of the brain as a prediction engine kind of slips in here too. It's a modern take on like, what was this thing even for? Right. Mm-hmm. And broadly speaking, prediction is like universal across the board important. Why do I hold on to memories? So I can predict what's happening next. Why do I develop synergies in my muscles so I can predict where my spear is going to go when I let go, right? Like all that stuff is about prediction. And in that way, we're kind of bound to time in this way. Ooh, next segment.
Yeah, seems like
just to keep kind of
keep going, man.
So, we were talking a lot about, from microtubules, then to Wolfram's idea that consciousness is computational. And our experience of time is just our limited computational capacity. And then we went to say, okay, well, if we take a real big step back and look at it philosophically, is, just the universe a computation engine, right? And is everything just computation all the way down? Which led us to this idea of, okay, well, if you put enough complexity and computation in one spot, do we get intelligence? And I went on a little bit of a journey and found this paper that came out recently, which was really interesting, called Intelligence at the Edge of Chaos. And basically what they did is they created a bunch of ECAs, what they call elementary cellular automata. Think of it like Conway's Game of Life. And each slice here is a time slice. So this is t equals 0, this is t equals 1, t equals 3, all the way down to t equals 2. And we have a bunch of these, right? And so what we do is we generate a data set and we basically classify them on different complexity measures, right? So if it's uniform, it's class 1, all the way to chaotic complex at class 4. And we use a bunch of complexity measures here to basically define what the training set is going to look like. So what we do is come in. Yeah.
Let's like on that first one, what would be the difference between like class 1 and class 4 in an intuitive sense in your grasp of this? Like,
yeah, totally. So the intuitive way to think about it is that you're just trying to predict the next line. And so you can see here, uniform, most of these lines are just going straight down.
Right.
And so if all you can see is the previous line and you're trying to predict the next one, if you're here, you can basically just predict the previous line over and over and over again, right? And so it's really, really easy to capture and to, basically learn how to recreate this. Because essentially what we're trying to teach the model is, given any steps or any time step t, predict t plus 1, right? And so the more aperiodic it gets, the more chaotic or complex, the harder it is for the network to predict the next time step.
And you can use your human eyes for this too, right? Like in the first one, it's easy for us to sort of pick up that pattern is mostly like continuing good lines. And then you see that second class and it's sort of like, there's some zigs and some zags, but I still sort of get how this thing flows. But by the time we're in class 4, it's like, oh, there's some like probably organic flavored algorithm that's computing this. Yeah.
And to be clear, and I think this is an important point, is that all of this ECA data, it's deterministically a word. The next token in this case is the t plus 1 step.
That whole
line. Yeah. And then surprisingly, they don't actually the spread and find that there's a linear correlation between the complexity of the ECA that they pre-trained on and its downstream performance on the task, even though the pre-training complexity had nothing to do with the actual downstream tasks.
So like crazy transfer.
Right, exactly. And so they're basically saying, we've heard that attention is all you need. Is complexity all you need? Because they're essentially positing, hey, we just kind of like generated a bunch of complexity, had the pre-train these networks to understand the underlying complexity and then predict. And I think one of the interesting things that they talk about and they try to explain it is that the models themselves are over parameterized and essentially are learning complex solutions to simple problems. For this uniform class, it would just learn, I just need to spam the same thing over and over again. It would find that the complex class 4 stuff, what they found is that it actually started to attend to previous frames, which is not necessarily required. It's actually the wrong way to solve the problem. It doesn't need to do that.
You don't need that.
How it learns a more complex set of internal features to do the prediction because it's over parameterized, which then allows us to simulate and generate the target data distribution, right? So we were able to get very close and predict G plus 1, but we're not using the mathematical approach that we know is how we got the data. We're simulating that approach, right?
Oh, man.
And that's where we get things like hallucination, where not learning the underlying, closed form solution, we're approximating it through additional complexity of relatively simple mechanisms. So I think that's really interesting. I think kind of like a lot of the stuff together.
Yeah.
I mean,
how's this hitting everybody?
I have a question. I guess I had to leave. So should I do a snipe by and then drive away?
What's your question?
Yeah.
Shoot us. Close, right? And because I don't think the level of complexity has really had anything to do with the fractal dimension necessarily. But these fractals they seem self-repeating, or at least as underlying structure, but not all of them are self-repeating. So I guess if it's not self-repeating, then you actually need to look at the previous frames to come up with the next one potentially. So I don't know if that changes things or makes it better. I don't know if that
by definition, I think by definition, I think they are closed form computable, right?
These are
core.
Yeah.
But not all fractals.
Right. Not all fractals are, but these are more like fractals across both time and computational, like rule interpretation and like starting conditions. Those are sort of like different dimensions on which of degrees of freedom on which like the simulation is run. I'll say it answer. Yeah, it's an interesting world. I feel like there's a lot of stuff around large language models and their ability to like learn the features around emergence that is really cool.
How big were these models? How I mean, I guess that's relative to
they were small. So they're using GPT-2. These are tiny, like
now I'm fucking curious about what happens when you scale up 10,000x. Like what patterns are there?
Yeah, just to call out. So this is just the models trained on complex rules integrate information from past states to make their predictions, where in contrast, models trained on simpler rules displayed lower attention across the last 10 states. The simpler attention structure suggests that these models learn the trivial solution, which is in line with their downstream performance. So they're learning this 8-bit instantaneous rule, right? And they apply it to this current state. And so you wouldn't need to have attention, and the fact that these complex are attending the previous states.
Yeah, that is fascinating.
Intelligence and repurpose the learn-based reasoning on downstream tasks. So it's something around like it's learning fundamental parts of intelligence, right? Is being able to they posit that just to predict complexity.
It makes a certain sense. Like that's part of how chess players learn things, right? They go from having to do like the algorithmic analytical one specific move at a time to they start to just observe entire patterns and lines of play, right? Like it's not just I see this image, it's I see this currently being executed, and that impossible for a layperson to it's all these different sub patterns that they've picked up gives them this much more robust and I need to find that citation. That's a good one.
I saw
super interesting
in the like abstract, and they were referencing that Packard paper where they were talking about the edge of chaos. And like one of the simulations from that paper is this forest fire, right?
Oh, you mentioned that before.
Where you have like the ecosystem gains emergent intelligence that the agents do not have because the attention layers like in the forest and not in the
clouds.
trees.
Yeah, right. The forest. Yeah.
The idea is you got all these little, a tree can grow randomly, right? At any spot. And then there's like a decision about whether or not to grow a tree in the next spot or like spawn a little seedling in the next spot based off of some rules, right? And then so the rules where it's like higher probability the forest gets denser, the forest tends to burn down. But there's, thresholds at which the forest doesn't burn down because boundaries occur in between clusters of the forest, right? And so the whole thing is there's like a random lightning strike, which may set a tree on fire, which may then propagate to other trees nearby. And then, so the learning happens in the forest's structure, but the individual tree agents do not know about the forest. And so like, that sort of intelligence at the edge of chaos, I'm really interested in that. I feel like touching that edge of emergence is like where we start to see the thing that we're naming as intelligence or as like intention, when it's really like
right. Yeah.
Rule emergence. And then is that us? Like, are we just
that? I was just going to say that kind of tracks with understanding of neurons. Oh my goodness. What are we looking at?
Which is, I want to show you guys another emergent property, which are ants.
Ant rope.
Very simple creatures. They operate on simple rules. However,
each one
consider the intelligence where they're creating a bridge to a wasp nest using only their bodies.
It's just all these ants linked together. How you do that? How you guys do that? How you know?
Pretty wild.
And the intercommunication patterns and like taking
definitely microdomains.
I'm okay with it.
I mean, I had a minute where I was upset about it, but then
of course,
I came back around.
I'm
Like,
trying
all
to give
right,
everybody the space. It's okay. It'll be okay. You'll get through the other side.
yeah. I mean, it's hard. It's hard. It's hard to accept that nothing is conscious or everything is conscious. You know,
Everything is
I mean,
conscious. Just a little.
it's a little, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I'm interested. Yeah, these are some interesting problems. I mean, the whole emergence question, like this is relevant to our day-to-day lives. It's relevant to also the frontier of science.
Yes.
You want to talk about those organoids? Like, whoa. So, right,
Let's
yeah.
find that butterfly. Let me see. I'm going to take
See,
a
we can pull up like a video or
butterfly
something. I was trying to
organoid
find a
forest.
good screenshot of the butterfly the other day, but I didn't find one. And I was like, well, I'll log in and look at the butterfly. And it was like, we're down. And I was like,
Jeffrey
where's the
Castillo,
brain
the Nature
organoid
Documentary.
API when you need one? They're not high
So,
availability.
for those who don't know what a brain organoid is,
Yes, please.
It basically, scientists take a bunch of pluripotent stem cells and then through manipulation create a bolus or basically a bunch of neuronal cells. So it's like a mini kind of brain where it's got neurons and it's kind of suspended in a fluid. And shockingly, we find that it can learn when we prod it with electrical signals, magnetic signals, when we add things like dopamine and serotonin. We're finding ways that we can interface with these kind of organoids is what we're calling them. And, similarly, I'm not sure who to attribute this quote to. I think it was Ilya, but similarly to the networks, organoids just seem to want to learn. And they do it
I mean, that tracks my understanding of
faster,
brains.
cheaper, and vastly more energy efficiently than we could ever imagine. And so, yeah, that's just for you guys, that's what we're talking about. And
I feel
then
like
these
that
things have
tracks.
been integrated into larger systems where you're kind of either trying to use it in lieu of a neural network or in combination thereof. And I think that's what we're talking about with the butterfly. Yeah.
Yes, correct.
Exactly.
So the idea of this butterfly, I'm looking for something. I found one Instagram reel that seemed way overproduced. I'm just going to go with our
They
friend
have
here. But
everything that they could, like spider robot body, walking robot body, flipping itself over robot body, a virtual butterfly, Doom, everything runs. My microwave runs Doom. So why shouldn't brain organoids also run Doom?
They can run Doom. They can play Doom. They can be fed Doom images and give responses. I'm looking for.
And are they conscious?
That's a great question.
And how would we know?
Before I finish this, let me speak to something neuro though. Like, brains are hungry. Brains are lazy. Brains are energy. They are efficiency demons. They love efficiency. So like, it makes total sense to me that they're just going to learn whatever the hell you shine at them. Like, give me inputs. Okay. Give me something to do. Yeah. So that doesn't help with the feelings of, oh, good. We've put brains in jars.
Comprehension. Yeah.
Do we want to?
Well, they're getting some of the organoids to update their internal weights through like dopamine and serotonin, right? Because how do you do reinforcement learning? How do you have it feel pleasure or pain? Well, you either give or withhold neurotransmitters, right?
What is consciousness? Like we need to know.
Thank you. This is why it's
probably
important.
A little while ago,
Yeah, because like I can still picture a world where a lump of my brain cells is not me, right? It's just a big wet ball of wires that is really, really like I said, it loves to find efficiency and like get glucose. Again, we are in such uncharted territory. I don't want to hold any stance too strong here. I'm going to share this.
Yeah, same. I mean, like, I feel like we shouldn't dismiss the problem, started a whole podcast about it, but, yeah, it's hard for us to say.
I'm not dismissed. I'm not dismissed. Just making sure. It's more like, this is a guy talking about them. I can't find anybody else with like
screenshot.
Yeah, like it's like it's being taken down. Anybody got anything? Can y'all do a little
like people,
search?
Yeah.
the idea is that you can take one of these brain organoids and embed it in a system where its inputs and outputs are mapped to a simulated butterfly in a simulated world and behavior, and it's given inputs that are like sensory details from the butterfly's perspective. Here is an image that might be instructive.
From like a TikTok, which I think is from.
Is this it? I'm not sure. Oh, this might be something else. Man, it's funny that this is hard to find.
I mean, yeah, I have that one lady who I usually follow, but
Bear bait.
or show you. In time screen.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Yeah, it's obviously like a huge moral dilemma.
Yeah,
it takes my brain to so many places. I think like it's interesting that we seem to be able to interface with them so easily. I think that was kind of surprising. I guess it's not surprising, but it's like the equivalent. I'm a huge sci-fi nerd. It's like the equivalent of like going and meeting aliens and then being able to like hook up, right? And your computers like talk to each other.
Right.
Wait, like this isn't like why should we be able to do this?
How could this be? In this my earth, yeah.
And then it gets down to like, okay, well, it seems that we can kind of like craft these very fine-tuned networks, right, that learn to do a certain thing. Like, what happens when we start patching these into the brain, right?
Trading them.
Are we gonna start like offloading a lot of like? Is the key to AGI really this fusion of biology and technology, and is like that really going to be the Warhammer path, right? Where
is it a key, or is it a Kool-Aid Manning through the front wall?
Right,
sentience. Like, hey, stop trying to solve that. I got brains. Just slinging them around.
Normal brains.
What we could do. This is like the first one that got us talking on this before.
Yeah. He's just like a guy that like he just talks about how scary
He's freaked. He's just freaked out. Happy Halloween, everybody.
Yeah. Who is that? It's like GT someone, the like lady who talks about it.
The blonde guy?
Yeah.
Something or other. Sure. I can't.
Let's see. Yeah, there's a lot of that, but like she talks about it like a lot because the brain, bear brain official. Yeah.
Oh.
Well, yeah, they've had like she covers it so much and she goes deep into it. It's got some like
we should shout her
but
out.
Also,
she's good at this and she is consistent with it. So we should follow her. Do you have a link? Do you have a
I do, yeah. Bear brain official. There we go.
Yeah, it's funny. Here, let me go to
the official bear bait. It's weird. It's weird, but it's also like, it does. Brian talked about it. Was like, this might be the only path to upload, and I was like, oh,
to upload brain to Sky.
Right. That was the thing. I was at least wanting to try that. So.
Well, I think that it does kind of bring this interesting question with the microtubules, right? Which is like. People it feels like they're grasping for the quantum explanation, right? Because they want something more. They point to this.
That feels very much. Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't know. Like that kind of goes back to like quantum effects versus like qubit quantum computer.
Right.
For hard sci-fi lovers like Liz and I know we're reading a lot of Greg Egan, like a big component of underpinning a lot of his books is like they invent this quantum processor, right? And then you're able to essentially virtualize the human mind.
Infinite compute, kind of like
therefore both the physical processes and I'm not sure. And I think he even goes down to like they're simulating the microtubules, like they're down to like that level, and it kind of gets back to my question of like, if we believe Wolfram's computational irreducibility arguments, then we have to do the stepwise computation, right?
Is this that? Let's have a look at this butterfly. I don't know if the sound is coming through, which is fine, and we don't need to listen hard. But he's got the
Yeah, it's just this. I mean, it's a simulation, right?
Feel.
Right. But what I'm saying is like,
Anyway,
if the computational irreducibility is the biology, we would have to simulate the biology, right? And in a way that is, I'm trying, the words escape me, but is like the same, right, as the original brain. Otherwise, like, is this a purely software process? And
and
like,
that
we
brings us
don't
back to the
actually model
biological.
the microtubules and the biology. We just need to model.
Like
That's good. Yeah.
consciousness must emerge from something biological.
No,
Mm.
I'm saying if we want to replicate human consciousness, it must be biological.
I see.
Well, but
That
then
makes
what
sense.
is
That makes sense. Yeah.
biological, right? Like, there's sort of this boundary condition, like, you know, if we want to simulate human consciousness, we have to fully simulate the whole biology of it. But if we are doing a fully accurate simulation, then is that not a biological entity? Like,
That's
you
kind of
know,
what I'm getting at. Yeah. Like
Yeah.
if you are fully simulating the biology just to get to consciousness, then that is a strongly biological essentialism approach. It's not to say that you are ruling out all other possibilities. It's just saying like, I'm going to Kool-Aid man through the wall. I'm going to simulate every part of you, as
Yeah.
opposed to necessarily defining what actually could constitute this. And I'm not saying it's a bad approach. It's just like big hammer to simulate every inch of it. You know,
duality thing, right? Which is like, is qualia a distinct thing, right? Is it, or is it an emergent property of the underlying simple rules process, the complexity argument, and that it's emergent, therefore it's computationally irreducible, and we have to model the whole thing in order to like.
To get human consciousness, though, right?
Correct.
Like specifically, we're narrowed in on the one thing we know. At least one of us has consciousness, right?
Right.
And that's legit. Like that's a legit place to start with that line, right? But I do hold a lot of space for like. I don't see a lot of compelling argument for why metal couldn't do tubule stuff, right? Why you couldn't just generate something, and maybe I'm that's too strong a dichotomy. It's less that, it's more like, what are the species of consciousness, right? Not everything is a fruit fly, so you don't do biology only on the fruit fly. You do biology on all class of all fruit flies, and not fruit flies, all living organisms. Yeah, and
I mean,
that tracks with like. Go ahead. Yeah.
There's these words. What is it? Homomorphic means it's the same. Isomorphic means the end result is the same, but the internal process is similar but not exact, right? And so, like, can we approach isomorphic consciousness processes? Can we do that, or does it must be homomorphic only?
And can we generate like a species of these various species? Are we already doing that? Like, is that what this Cambrian explosion of AI research has been doing lately? We're just blasting out all these different sub-flavors of agentic systems and language models and diffusion models and stuff. And again, not to give them the same elevated status as the human consciousness thing, which is the one of the few we have. Like, sure of it. Sure of it.
I had an interesting thought, kind of just around like, dimensionality. Just Egan, still hopping around. He stores a lot of things, which is like, we talked about the computational universe hypothesis, and we know, from like a flatland experience, if you're a flatland, you're a 2D shape, and someone comes along and picks you up off of that into 3D space, right? Like your entire world explodes throughout time, right? Yeah. And every single edition of you, right? If you believe in the multiverse, right? And therefore you can almost say, well, okay, what is a fourth dimensional being other than the ability to comprehend the universe? And every time we go up a dimension, it's just the attention layer has moved to a higher process.
Yeah. Yeah, is the consciousness, not the intelligence of the forest, is a layer of dimensionality higher? Maybe not one dimension, but many several.
Right. Yeah, stuff that we can't even conceive of. Right.
Yeah.
It propagates across the T dimension and not but each agent only lives in the moment.
Right.
Right.
Mhm.
Make the decision in the moment. So the agent's
Mm-hmm.
attention layer is at
It's
T,
super personal. Yeah.
the force is across T.
Yeah.
You know?
Hyperdimensional beings. I mean, this
Oh,
fits with the computational concepts and the Ruliad stuff that Wolfram
yeah.
loves, and it gravitates me too. I mean, I don't fight against that concept. It
Right.
it resonates.
It's
But
just a degree of freedom, right? Like that's
yes,
all a dimension
yes.
is, That's why we can have so many dimensions in a large language model. Is like something can be more or less elephant if you want.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Well, that's
So
why
like,
embeddings work, right? It's like we just gave them enough degrees of freedom to try and capture all these weird directionalities of semantics and.
so
Ugh.
yeah, I mean, like, is that a higher dimensional thing? It seems like it.
Yeah.
Like, I like to tell people, your mind is a collection of stories. It's not
Mhm.
like a special like thing. And once you kind of like dissolve into, oh, I'm just a bunch of stories, like you kind of reach that higher level of attention across your life, and like most people get to that point once they finish growing their prefrontal cortex. So,
Or do enough acid, like get these
yeah,
different perspectives.
right.
Did you guys see the research? I'm trying to find it right now.
Yeah.
I'll add it to the show notes where, and we might have mentioned it before. They found when they were trying to like look at small networks and figure out why they worked, they basically found, oh, I'm totally blanking now.
You can dig it up.
So each of these simple networks was actually simulating a higher dimensional complex network.
Right.
And so it would be like that. And it was the superposition and like higher dimensionality and harmonics and stuff they found. And so it was actually like a lot more was happening under the hood in these weights than we even can conceptualize.
Right.
And so it just kind of like throws fuel to the fire.
We should dig into that. We should dig into that at some point. Just try and get like the ground level view of how do those things, what we mean by the superposition and stuff, right? Like I have the foggy understanding of it, but like it would be cool to get some like examples for the layman.
Yeah, it's an interesting. I don't know. Yeah, I'm super, super jazzed about exploring the Ruliad and digging into that. I was always looking for somebody to have read that and like take it seriously. It's hard when people are like, I have a theory of everything, and especially when computer scientists go to physicists and they're like, I have this theory. Physicists are like,
Sure you do.
So,
Well, I know
but,
some
I mean,
former
with a
physicists,
lot-
and they think that that's kind of a shitty attitude. So
yeah, it's true.
common.
Yeah, don't talk down to physicists, but also like we know things, we know math. That's all we do.
Right.
Yeah.
Oops.
Oh,
There's a
cool.
tendency for every field to think that they understand everything from their perspective, and it can really cloud good discussion. That's why I think these interdisciplinary approaches, interdisciplinary podcasts are a good idea.
Yeah. You can't get out from behind your point of view. So you gotta get other perspectives and other reflections.
So there's the transformer circuits paper we can cover it.
Oh,
Love
it.
They basically built these toy models and then
Super
investigate the superposition stuff.
Oh, that's
Yep.
great.
I'm very in. All right, y'all.
I think we have to stop. Yes.
I think we've got the slot. Brain's also tired, so I'll see
same.
ya.
I keep trying to get ideas out, and it doesn't.
Thanks for coming, everyone. This was fun.
Great.
How does everybody feel? Was that good? We can
was
stop
all
recording.
Yeah. Let's stop recording.
That was good.